It sounded like they knew who did this, but unfortunately it would take decades to solve it. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Cheryl Hall. Viewer discretion is advised. Cheryl was born on June 22nd, 1961. She was one of 2 kids, and she grew up in a very happy home with her mom and her sister. And she lived her whole life in Aurora, Illinois. In 1979, Cheryl would marry the absolute love of her life, Chuck Hall. The 2 of them were described as soulmates. Their wedding day was absolutely the happiest day of both of their lives. People would say that Chuck, they had just never seen him happier than the day of their wedding. And for 20 months, that happiness just seemed to never go away. But that's as long as their marriage lasted because of a tragedy. It was approximately 6 p.m. on September 9th, 1981. Chuck had come home from a long day at work, and this is the apartment building they lived in. He walks into their house, calls out for his wife's name. She doesn't respond. He walks into the bedroom, and he finds something that would scar him for life. His wife, Cheryl, partially clothed, was hanging with a cord around her neck from a doorknob of the bedroom door. She was deceased, and it was a cord from their clothes iron that was used to strangle her. The coroner determined that this was a strangulation that was done to her by somebody else. Chuck's entire life just shattered right then and there. He was incredibly devastated, and his behavior, his reaction, all seemed and felt incredibly genuine. But of course, once police arrive, he's the first person they suspect of doing this because, as we all know, it's pretty much always the husband. But they found no cracks in this marriage. They were very much in love with each other. And Chuck had an alibi. He was at work, and this was confirmed. There was no way he could have done this himself. And so while police did kind of drag him along for some time, eventually they did clear him from any responsibility from this murder. There were signs of a struggle in the bedroom. However, there was no forced entry into the house. The windows weren't broken or cut. The door was not kicked in. Nothing was broken. Also, nothing was stolen from the house. Cheryl's purse was hanging from another doorknob with the cash inside. And Chuck would say that nothing appeared to have been taken. This poor man, he essentially blamed himself for this. He was so distraught and felt that he should have been there to protect her. Everybody knew he didn't do this, but he would just constantly blame himself for not being there. He did provide police with someone he believed did this, a coworker of his named Larry Galloway. Larry was his coworker, but also kind of like casual friends with him and Cheryl, but he always made Cheryl feel really uncomfortable. According to a friend of Cheryl's, I guess a few weeks before the murder happened, Larry had invited himself to their apartment, Cheryl and Chuck's apartment, when Chuck wasn't there. And that made her feel very uncomfortable and kind of scared. Police wanted to talk to him, but he essentially refused. He refused to take a polygraph. He would not cooperate with police whatsoever. Police tried to kind of tail him just to see if they can get DNA from him over the years, but he always was one step ahead of them. He always held on to like his coffee cups or soda cans or whatever, just so that police couldn't go and get them. Because there was DNA left behind at the crime scene, male DNA that was not Cheryl's husband, and so they believed there was DNA from her killer. His behavior now seemed extremely suspicious. He didn't have an alibi either, not a solid one, but police couldn't do anything because they didn't have the technology back then to say for sure like his DNA would have matched the DNA at the crime scene. One, because they couldn't get his DNA. They didn't have enough probable cause to get a warrant. And so unfortunately, Cheryl's case just goes cold, and it stays cold for some time. Chuck would eventually remarry many years later. He ended up having a couple of kids, but he never, ever let Cheryl's death go. He had a hard time moving on. He visited her grave all the time, and his new wife said it was almost like she was competing with a ghost. He just really, really, really wanted justice for Cheryl. Fast forwarding now to 2008. Larry Galloway probably thought, they've stopped investigating this case. And then he eventually got sloppy. One day, Larry goes to a Chili's. Investigators are still tailing him. And they were watching him eat, and they saw him leave, and they were able to take a straw from a drink they knew he was drinking from. The DNA found underneath Cheryl's fingernails was a match to the DNA left on his straw. So he was officially arrested and charged with her murder. However, the DNA under her fingernails was good evidence, but it wasn't strong evidence, and they had nothing else. And so, unfortunately, they offered him a plea deal, and Cheryl's family very begrudgingly agreed to it because they would rather not take the chance of him being acquitted. So he was sentenced to just 10 years in prison for manslaughter. He would end up being released in 2016 and is now a free man. The news devastated Chuck. He had actually been diagnosed with cancer many years prior. It went into remission, and then it came back. And then like a year or so after it came back is when they were told that her killer got released. But he did hold out until she got justice. He himself passed away from cancer in 2016.